Story 3 is truly horrible and, well, kind of a mystery as well. What this guy's goal was truly amazing and had good intentions. But what happened as he was attempting his goal was disturbing. But before we begin, if true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, let's begin. Our first story starts off with a man named Daniel Dukes. Daniel, you could say, was a normal guy, but had trouble respecting boundaries. With a prime example, in 1996, a 24-year-old Daniel Dukes had picked up this video game series called Ultima, and he and thousands of other early-day PC gamers picked up this game and would become hooked. Ultima was a huge hit in the gaming industry. There was this massive role-play open-world fantasy game that, for some reason, I'm not sure myself, but a lot of people played it. But Daniel would take this a step further. For many people, they would show their appreciation by playing the game and telling other people that haven't played the game how good the game is. Or again, spending countless of hours playing the game and buying in-game currencies, or supporting the creator by donating money to him. But Daniel would take that next level of appreciation. He would go and figure out where the creator of this video game lived, and once he found the location on where they lived, in the middle of the night in that spring of that year, he would go to this guy's house and would knock on the door, and well, the creator wouldn't answer, and so he would knock again, and again he would be met with silence. And instead of, leaving, Daniel would become so angry to the point where he would leave but come back a couple of hours later and would proceed to break a window and climb right inside of this guy's house. He would then proceed to go upstairs and go into one of these many bedrooms that the creator had, and then once he was in the bedroom, he would just lie down and fall asleep. And the next morning, when the creator finally woke up, he would see Daniel lying in one of his beds. And so, of course, understandably, in a fit of rage, he would tell Daniel to get out. But Daniel, who was unfazed, would look at the creator straight in the face and would just say, "I want to sleep here." So with no option left, the creator would call the police. And even though as the police are coming towards the house, Daniel would still be unfazed, and he would still be in the bed and show no intentions of getting out of the bed and leaving the house. So the police would arrive upstairs and would see Daniel, and again, with no intentions of moving, the police would haul him out and arrest him. A year later, Daniel would get rearrested, for this time trespassing in Orlando, Florida's famous SeaWorld. Daniel, after hours, would sneak into the manatee exhibit and just began to swim around with these massive manatees because apparently he wanted to play with them. But despite his criminal actions, Daniel was far from a criminal. He was described as being the opposite of a criminal. He was this gentle hippie who just adored animals. Moving on to when Daniel turned 27, he had joined this small religious community of people that practice Hare Krishna, which is a small branch of hedonism. They get the name from their chant Hare Krishna that people again repeat over and over again. That's how they get their name. So Daniel would join this community and he would have a place to stay, but during this stay he wouldn't really take the religious that seriously. He would practically, to put it in fairness, blow everything off. He would never really help out in the temple that they prayed in, and instead would use all of his time feed the wild birds that came to nest in the temple garden. He would go as far as to keep a notebook where he would track who fed the birds, who didn't feed the birds, how much he fed the birds, and so to everybody else it just felt like Daniel cared about the birds and nothing else. But after a month of being in this community, Daniel would abruptly tell the other community members that he's going to be taking a vow of silence, which in their community is very frowned upon. And everyone in this group were confused because there was no reason for him to take the vow of silence. But either way, Daniel would excuse himself, pack his bags and leave. Well, when Daniel left this group, he would go on to commit various petty offences. And eventually, once Daniel got sick of living this mediocre lifestyle, he would decide to head back to one place that really made him happy: Orlando, Florida's SeaWorld, the same place that he previously jumped in with the manatees. So he would find himself at this park and would find himself making his way over to the killer whale section. And this killer whale section had a killer whale demonstration going on, where these trainers were going to be swimming in an enclosure with these killer whales. And obviously, as you know, I don't think I need to tell you, killer whales are massive. So Daniel takes a seat and begins to watch these massive killer whales in action. And he becomes so transfixed on the show to the point where people around him noticed that this guy was not even moving by a hair. Some thought that was next to him, he might be going through a heart attack. because the guy wasn't moving at all. But the one thing that was moving was his eyeballs. But onlookers were going to say that Daniel's biggest reaction in the entire show was when the trainers brought out Tilikum, one of the biggest killer whales in the aquarium, and also one of the biggest killer whales ever held in captivity, measuring over 22 feet long and weighing over 12,000 pounds. Daniel had snapped out of his trance and began to clap and celebrate when this whale was brung out. That night, once the park shut down and everyone left, Daniel would come back in, but this time wearing a bathing suit. He hops over the fence and sneaks into the SeaWorld, the same way he did a couple of years ago. He would then manage to sneak through the park without being picked up on camera and would quickly make his way over to the killer whale enclosure. Once there, he would take his top off, his shoes off, and then hop the fence. And once hopped the fence, he could basically jump into the big swimming pool with Tilikum. And guess what he does? He goes head first into this massive swimming pool with this massive killer whale. The intentions of Daniel were pure. The only reason he was jumping into this massive swimming pool was to play with Tilikum. And it's assumed when Daniel jumped in, Tilikum also was eager to play with Daniel, because pretty quickly Tilikum would grab Daniel by the shorts and would bring him right down to the bottom of the pool until Daniel drowned. After seeing that he was deceased, Tilikum would thrash his body around, ripping bits of him, until finally it draped Daniel's body over its back, and that's where Tilikum kept him. The next day, when staff showed up, they made this discovery, and at first they couldn't get the body of Tilikum because Tilikum wanted to keep his toy, so they had to use a special medical hoist to lift Tilikum into the air and retrieve Daniel's body. Daniel's death was ruled an accident due to his poor decision making, and so as such, Tilikum was not punished. Born in Japan 1965, Hiyashi Auchi from a young age was born with some ambition. Born in Japan, Hiyashi would be born with terrific work ethic that most Japanese people get instilled into them from a young age. He would grow up to be this amazing academia and eventually get a job at a nuclear power plant called the Takamura. And for a while he would work there and nothing special would happen, even though yes, it was a big name job. The truth was it was pretty boring and quite mundane, but either way it would pay the bills, so he would never complain. This nuclear area sector that he worked in was very important for the country because the country of Japan only had a few natural resources, and a lot of the time the country of Japan had to spend a ton on imported energy, and so Japan would build the first commercial nuclear power plant just 4 years after Hiyashi was born. The power plant again was located in Takamura since it was ideal, since this place contained abundance of land and space. So pretty quickly this whole area would be a campus of a nuclear compound, research institutes, full enrichments and disposable facilities, and eventually 1/3 of the entire city's population would rely on the nuclear industry. September 30th, 1999 was a busy day for Hiyashi and his company that worked in the power plant. The now 35-year-old Hiyashi would find himself participating in an experiment to see if skipping some steps that the plant would do would make things faster. The plant would convert uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for nuclear energy purposes. This was typically done with a careful multi-step process that involved mixing several elements in a carefully timed sequence, which, as you could probably guess, took a lot of time. And the company that was held responsible for this fuel had just missed their deadline, which was on September 28th. So in a desperate attempt to make things right, they would send out Hiyashi along with some of his peers, 29-year-old Masato Shinohara and the 54-year-old supervisor Yukato Yokokawa. But again, they would be sent out to make a shortcut of making this fuel. And even though yes, they were experienced in the power plant industry, they were definitely not experienced on how to make fuel, and especially how to shortcut it. So none of them, apart from the supervisor, had really no idea what they were doing. And instead of using this automatic pump to mix about 5.3 pounds of enriched uranium with nitric acid with the designated vessel, again, you need to use a machine for this. But no, they would use their bare hands to pour 35 pounds of that into a steel bucket. And at 10:35 a.m, that uranium would reach a critical mass. The room exploded with a blue flash that confirmed that a nuclear chain reaction had occurred and was releasing lethal emissions of radiation. The plant was obviously evacuated. Hiyashi and his colleagues were taken to the National Institute of Radiological Science. They had all been directly exposed to this radiation because of the different proximities to the fuel. They were each irradiated at different degrees. Exposure to more than 7 sieverts of radiation is considered as fatal. The supervisor Yukita would be exposed to 3 and would be one of the only person in the group that would survive. Masato was exposed to 10 sieverts, while Hiyashi, who stood directly above the bucket pit that they poured all these chemicals in was exposed to 17. Yassi's exposure to radiation was the most exposure to radiation any human had ever gone through. He had been in immediate pain and could barely breathe. By the time he got to the hospital, he was vomiting violently and eventually fallen unconscious. His radiation burns literally covered his entire body from head to toe, and eventually his eyes would start leaking of blood. The worst part about this whole story was Yashi, instead of being put out of his misery in the nicest way possible, because he was going through so much pain and there was no chance of him surviving, would be used as a guinea pig, unfortunately, as scientists would conduct different types of experiments since they've never got the chance to experiment with this high level of radiation. But this was all due to the fact that the family of Yashi wanted this to happen so they could help other people out. And his final words before dying was, "I can't take it anymore. I am not a guinea pig." And you have to imagine when he got exposed to this radiation, it was just non-stop burning. And of course he couldn't even see since his eyes stopped working. And it's said that his actual skin began to melt off of his body. And not to mention he would suffer multiple heart attacks. But as he was about to die, the doctors would revive him thanks to his family asking the doctors to. And so that's what they do. He would be revived and he would have to go through this pain again and again. And on December 21st, 1999, he would have a cardiac arrest due to multiple organ failures, which would finally put him out of his pain. The supervisor of the two deceased workers, Yoko Kawawa, was released after 3 months of treatment. He had suffered minor radiation sickness, but survived. But he would be faced with criminal charges of negligence in October 2000. JCO, the company that actually ran the power plant, would get sued and would pay up to $121 million to settle 6,875 compensation claims from the affected locals. On April 20th, 2008, a 41-year-old Roman Catholic priest named Adile Antonio put a helmet, a thermal flight suit, and a parachute. And once he began to put these things on, a crowd about 200 to 300 people began to start cheering, because what Adile was about to do was truly something different. Adile was born on February 8, 1967, to a family in Pelotas. Pelotas was a city in Brazil that was known to be quite charming, located in the southern part of Brazil, specifically in a state called Rio Grande do Sul. Pelotas was rich in cultural heritage, influenced by many different types of people, ranging from Portuguese to Africans. It was safe to say when it came to trying different cultures, Pelotas was the place to go. Pelotas was also known for its culinary delights, particularly its traditional sweets and pastries. One of these famous delicacies was called the Doces de Pelotas. It was like this chocolate truffle that's mixed in with coconut sweets. But anyways, Adele was born to a family of 3 kids, him being the 3rd child and being the youngest. His parents, Salate and Ariello, would have a happy life together, but unfortunately things wouldn't work out just 4 years after he was born, and they would get a divorce. Once divorced, Adele would move with his mother, who moved back to Paraguay because that's where she was from, and she would stay there before ultimately she would pass away from a throat trauma. And at this point, Adele was 15. Adele, once returning back to his father, who was again in Brazil, would become into a very hard worker. He would start from a young age becoming a tire repairman with his father, before later moving on as a gas station attendant with his uncle, which the uncle actually owned the gas station. But that's not just all though, he would have a side job on top of his main job, and his side job was painting tablecloths. All this just to have extra income. Adele was described as a quiet and humble guy, and also a very good student. But the August of 2003, Adele would unexpectedly join a seminary in Panaragua, which, if you don't know what Panagua is, it's Brazil's oldest city, which is known to have a lot of religion and culture behind it. And if you don't know what a seminary is, it's basically, from what I researched, about a religious school that teaches you about the Bible and other religious things. And for a lot of his life, he would learn the Bible and eventually go out and spread the word of the Bible. But during his time spreading the word, he would help raise money for his seminary by doing odd things around the city. He would often stop many truck drivers that were going in and out of the city and would console them, because a lot of these drivers were heavily underpaid, and which meant a lot of them were miserable because they had no other choice. Not to mention the extreme long hours that they would have to go through. And with his way of words, he would tell them about the amazing words of the Bible before ultimately these drivers would feel better and would actually give him money for his charity. But this wasn't enough for Delier though. He needed some more excitement in his life, and also something big enough that would raise a lot of money at once. Skipping some time, and there was one thing that he wanted to do a lot, which was something to do with flying. The now 40-year-old priest knew that he could do something that would satisfy his hunger for flying and also raise a ton of money at the same time. So after getting a year of training, the now skydiving / wild trained priest was ready to do his big stunt. And so on April 20th, 2008, the now 41-year-old priest put on his helmet, his thermal flight suit, and a parachute, and as he's getting ready, he could hear the crowd of over 200 people cheering on for him. Once he was all suited and booted, he would then be strapped to 1,000 helium balloons and would begin to ascend in the sky over the port city of Parabaga. This stunt would not only raise him a ton of money, but also breaking a world record, a secret desire that lurked in Adelia. 8 hours after he set off, the crew that was meant to take care of Adelia would arrive at the meeting destination that they expected Adelia to come back to, and after a while they would notice that there's no sign of Adelia. And by the way, they did have a GPS and an air traffic control radio to him, so they should keep in contact, right? Wrong. During the 5 to 6 hour mark, they had lost contact with Adelia, but they never speculated anything. At least anything bad anyways. They just told themselves that the machine must have malfunctioned and Adelia was still a-okay. But again, the time for his arrival came around and went, and the crew didn't see a sign of Adelia. So they knew that something bad must have happened. And just again, after an hour of waiting, they would declare Adelia as missing. And unfortunately, 2 days later after he vanished, the cluster of balloons that was on his back was found, floating in the Atlantic Ocean near the Santa Catarina. But Adelia was not with them, and for 3 months there was no sign of him. Until July of that year, tugboat workers were just off the southern eastern coast of Brazil, and they would come across a body floating in the waters near the city of Macaé. When they brought it to shore, authorities believed that body belonged to Delia. So that'll be it for today's video. If true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do, and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, I thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.